these stories in church history. I'm almost every week as I sit down to prepare these lessons. The title of this series of lessons is A Brief History. But it's not even that big. A brief history would be twice or maybe three times what I'm able to present here. I feel like I'm taking a thimble and I'm attempting to empty the ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and I'm emptying it one thimble at a time. Because honestly, each of these subjects that we've talked about is material for several weeks, and yet we're spending a week on just hitting the highest of the high points. We're up to lesson 6, the medieval ages, part 1, looking at the church from around about AD 600 through roughly 1100. The problem is church history, as in any history really, doesn't fall into nice, neat little chunks that you can say, okay, this is what happened in these 3 centuries, and this is what happened in these 5 centuries, or whatever. They blend, they morph, they just like, American history. Well, you can say the Civil War, the time leading up to the Civil War and after the Civil War. What was that, 1860? 66 was the end. Was it? Wasn't 66 the end of the Civil War? 64.
Because wasn't the Emancipation Proclamation signed in 63?
I was thinking 66, but anyway. But really, did the war end in 64, 5, 6? Where? No. I mean, Granny Clampett, she was still fighting the Civil War, and you go in certain parts of the South, and they haven't given up yet. General Lee will come back. He really will. Other wars tended to have sharper beginnings and endings. I don't know that we have really necessarily ever gotten over the Vietnam War. For those who had to fight the war, technically it's over, but the shadows of the Vietnam War. So all of that's just to say that when we look at various epochs in church history, it's very, very difficult, but for the purposes of the class. So this morning, what I wanted to do was to look at one of the larger movements during this time frame between 600 and 1100. Reminds me. What I wanted to draw up here for just a moment. We've been looking at a number of events, as in councils, church councils, first of all in Chalcedon, and then going through Constantinople 1 and 2 and that sort of thing. I wanted to emphasize that once an event begins, it never really ends, because there are reactions to the reactions, reactions to the reactions to the reactions. The councils did not stop. The last council that we looked at was 587, I think, Constantinople 2. See, I can't even remember my own dates. Roughly 600. Let's see. Nicaea 2. Nicaea 2 was 787. That's the last of what they refer to as the ecumenical councils, but that's not the last council. In fact, the last council of the Roman Catholic Church was Vatican II, and that was in the 60s. I can't remember. I think it was 60s, somewhere in there. And the decision of Vatican II, which a lot of Roman Catholics even today disagree with very profoundly, was that the Mass could be said in the vernacular, common vernacular of the people. It did not have to be in Latin. And one of the struggles in the Roman Catholic Church even today is the ultra-conservative Roman Catholics want to go back to the Latin Mass. And there has been some pushback. Certain dioceses, certain archbishops and bishops will allow the Latin Mass, some will not. They do not want the priests to perform the Latin Mass, which is deeply offensive to a good number of Roman Catholics. So anyway, so we talk about councils. It didn't just stop at year 800 or 900 or 1,000. They keep going. Several responses, and that sort of thing. I need to grab it. High-tech whiteboard eraser. So all of these things that we've been talking about are events that may have started at one point in time, but they continued, and especially their effects continued even up to the very day. So when this morning we turn our attention and look at monasticism, yes, we can kind of sort of come up with a rough idea of when monasticism began, primarily with Benedict. But he was not the first monastic. He was the first to create a rule for his house of monks, his house of monastics. So it may have started back around 500, a little bit after 500, but the effects of monasticism continue even today. And there are a number of monasteries that still continue even today. I didn't research this. The number probably is well up into the dozens, would be my guess. Last week we talked about the growing worldliness, the growing control, both politically and spiritually, the power of the Roman emperor once, mid 300s, once Constantine, 350 something, said that I'm going to be a Christian, so therefore everybody in the empire is going to be a Christian. Once everybody in the empire was basically declared a Christian and forced to become a Christian, whether they wanted to or not, then the purity of the church took a nosedive. If everybody's a Christian, then basically nobody's a Christian. If you can live your life the way that you always wanted to live it, in exactly as immoral and unethical, and still be called a Christian, then what does that mean for the purity of the church? And so, and you might say, well, it was great. It was great that Constantine became a Christian. Don't we want our political leaders to be Christians? If they truly serve God as the ultimate leader, yes. But if they just take their human power and apply it to the church, no, we don't. And so even today, I am really conflicted when somebody runs for president and they're a member of thus and such church, and everybody gets all excited. Oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if our president was Christian? Maybe so. Maybe so. But I don't want that individual to think that because he is the president and because he is a Christian, he can do whatever he wants. Either constitutionally or according to Scripture. So, monasticism was the response to this increasing worldliness. As the church fell off the cliff and everybody became a Christian, and so any kind of behavior was Christian, because if you're a Christian and you behave a certain way, that makes that behavior Christian. Certain individuals, many individuals said, this is not the way of Christ. So how do we fix it? Well, early on, in the even before Constantine became emperor and was converted and imposed Christianity over the empire, as more and more individuals became Christians who didn't live a Christian life, the response was to withdraw. And these individuals were called hermits. And the movement itself is called Eremitic. And sometimes there's an H on there and sometimes there's not. But Eremitic monasticism is solitary. And you want to read about really weird responses to unchristian Christianity. These guys would go out and live in a cave. They'd go out and build a hut way out in the middle of the desert. One guy was known, he had this great big pole, and he had this little bitty hut of a thing on top of this pole, and he would climb up and live in his little hut on top of this pole. Okay, exactly how is that a solution to the worldliness of the church? I don't know, but that was these individuals' response. Well, pretty soon it became obvious that you can't just go off way out into the desert and find a cave somewhere and live and consider that to be Christianity. You might be a devout hermit, but you really haven't affected the church very much. So later, the later developments in monasticism are known as Cenobitic, and I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Be a soft C, perhaps a hard C, Cenobitic. This is what we would know of as a monastery, and that is living in communion. It is a communal monastery, initially and almost primarily exclusively male. In other words, if you're going to remove yourself from the world, you have to get away from those mean, nasty, ugly women. I'm sorry, ladies, I'm not promoting that. I'm just saying that's because you want to remove yourself from temptation. Monasteries are led by an abbot. Now, there was an equal response by the ladies. Well, if you guys are over there in your monastery, what's for us to do? Well, there is a female monastic response, and their houses, their groups, are known as convents. They are known as nuns, and they are led either by an abbess. Sometimes their leader would be an abbess or a prioress. I'm not sure what the difference would be between those two titles. They were also, even though they had a female leader, they would be under the subjection of typically a male who obviously would not be living on the premises, but he would be their spiritual head, their leader. As I mentioned, the first of these who really came up with a rule, and I can't remember how many paragraphs there are in St. Benedict's rule. Very, very specific rules about how each monk is to live and what the rules, what the leaders, what the abbots are supposed to do and all of that. So he was the first to really create what is referred to as a house. Now, they wouldn't be just one simple house. There would be entire conclaves, but they were referred to as a house, and typically would go under the name of the originator of their rule. So, for instance, even today, there are Benedictine monks. There are black cowl Benedictine monks and white cowl Benedictine monks. And kind of interesting how this all unfolds and goes out throughout history. Towards the end of this particular time frame, 600 to 1100, the other name that you're probably going to be more familiar with, obviously Benedict, we're familiar with Benedict. The other one is Bernard. Now, these are not the only two monastic houses that developed during this time frame. There were many that developed, but these are names that you and I are familiar with. Bernard of Clairvaux, certainly one of the more significant leaders of a monastery. And so there are his, if I'm not mistaken, I could really be stepping in molasses here. I believe Bernard is the founder of the Cistercians. And I just looked that up this morning and just as quickly forgot it. Throughout, and in fact, if you're familiar with northern New Mexico, I know there's at least one monastery, active monastery, just north of Santa Fe. I don't know, are there any active monasteries here in Colorado? Typically in places where Roman Catholicism is very, very important, you will find at least one of the houses. There's a house, for instance, in Kentucky, a very famous monastery in Kentucky, which you wouldn't think that Kentucky would be a bastion of Catholicism, but all right. So as you read about different periods of Roman Catholicism, you're always going to come up with a reference to a monk or a house of monastery. Their influence continues even to this very day. Very, very powerful. All right, so what was it about monasticism? Why? What did they teach? What was their purpose? Well, number one, if the church is corrupted by the world, then the response is to get away from the world. All right? And interestingly enough, we turn to Scripture, and lo and behold, John tells us Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and the pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world. And the world is passing away along with its desires, and whoever does the will of God abides forever. All right. So if that's what you take as the response, if that's the medicine, then you want to get as far away from the world as you possibly can. And if you can't get away from the world, then what you do is you build a commune, you build a community, and you enclose it. You build a wall around it and say, well, we have to be here in this realm of the empire, but we're not going to let the empire in our community. All right? So, separation from the world is number one. Number two is union with God and Christ. So, if the disease is the fact that you can be a Christian without having any kind of love of God, without having any kind of love of Christ, all you have to do is wear this mark of baptism and say a few words, mumble a few words 2 or 3 times a year, and you're a Christian, then the medicine is to get closer to God, to get closer to Christ. And also, once again, we have biblical, keep going, instructions that kind of point that direction. But whatever gain I had, I counted as loss for the sake of Christ. Indeed, I count everything as loss for the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. For his sake I have suffered the loss of all things and count them as rubbish, in order that I may gain Christ and be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but that which comes through faith in Christ, the righteousness from God that depends on faith, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection, and may share in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, that by any means possible I may attain the resurrection from the dead. So we pull ourselves away from the world, because John says if you love the world, you can't abide in God. And we count everything as rubbish. We throw everything away for the purpose of union with God, right? Also, one of the purposes of the monastery was to develop the gifts of God for each monk. If someone wanted to be a scholar, they would go to a monastery, and through permission of the abbot, would say, all I want to do is study. Okay, fine. Somebody else didn't really feel like they were gifted to be a student, but they felt like they could serve the other monks. All right, so they would be a cook. Or maybe the abbot would assign them the job of being a cook. Maybe one of them wanted to practice medicine, and he would be the monastic doctor. Or whatever, an artist, a musician, whatever he, or on the female side over there in the convent, whatever she wanted to do, the abbot would say, okay, that is your life. You are free from all the other responsibilities. You don't have to cook. You don't have to garden. You don't have to do this. Now, I'm exaggerating, because usually in a monastery, all the monks shared all of the physical labor. But there would be some who would be, that would be their role, and they would be assisted by the other monks. And so this idea that whatever gift you felt like God gave to you, you could just flourish in this monastery. You didn't have to worry about all these other things. But then also service to the church and to the community. So depending on the house, depending on how that particular monastery was organized and created, there would be monks that would go out into the community and teach. There would be monks that would go out into the community and serve medicinally, or they would go out and just do whatever they felt like, or that particular house felt like their duty to the church was. And so they would venture forth, not to be in the world, but to serve the world. And then they would go back into their monastery, into their confines. Uh, Maybe they would do this on a weekly basis, maybe on a monthly basis, whatever. They didn't want to become stained by the world, but they felt like they were called to serve the world. A great many theologians, great many priests, bishops came from these houses. And so it was their service to the church to establish these. Okay, very, very quickly, what monastics gave to the church? Education. The study and the preservation of our biblical manuscripts. A great deal of that, I don't want to say all of it, but a great deal of the preservation of the manuscripts, the copying of the manuscripts is related back to these monasteries. And we have, for instance, in the New Testament, we have over 5,000 manuscripts. Some complete, some just partial. Many of those are because we have these monks who labored incredibly to make sure that they were copied with greater and lesser degrees of accuracy. But the arts, music, I don't want to say so much the painting arts and the sculpting arts, but the arts flourished in these monasteries. We tend to think of them being cold, dark, dank, drab places to exist. But if a monk considered himself to be an artist, the abbot gave him great permission. So long as he fell within the confines of the house, he wasn't supposed to just go out and willy-nilly create profane art, but he was encouraged and blessed to preserve the arts. Music, for instance, the Gregorian chants, the beautiful monastic chants and music that we have, we think is kind of odd and quaint, but you listen to that stuff, and after a while, you're like, wow, this is beautiful. This is incredible. It was the early churches, and I'm saying early in the sense of 600 to 1,000, but it was this time frame's effort to return the church to its pure beginnings. What are you called to do? Leave the world, right? What are you called to do? Have union with God. Have union with Christ. Give everything away so that you can be one with Christ, so that you can be one with God. We in the 21st century churches of Christ see it as a restoration movement, but it really was. Weird. How do you have a restoration movement with one sex over here and one sex over here? We wrinkle our foreheads and try to figure that one out to greater or lesser degree of success. But it really was for these men and women on the side, the nuns and the convent, it was their effort to say the church as we see it is corrupt and we're trying to fix it. However, alrighty, let's not get too crazy here. What are the dangers of this movement? Well, if you consider yourself to be 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 levels above everybody else in your Christianity, it really does lead to a sense of superiority. Well, you're just a Christian. You're just a simple Christian. But I am a special Christian. And so we have this hierarchy of faith. Are you just a simple Christian, or are you a special Christian? Secondly, you just really can't ever leave the world. How do you leave the world?
You know, I've been thinking and rereading Jesus' prayer in John 17. I don't ask you to take these people out of the world.
Yeah, that would be.
And here's what, basically what they're saying is, we want to be superior to Jesus' thought and come out of the world.
Uh, the problem is the world is as much in us as we are in the world. Right?
What we call the world actually is human nature.
Yeah.
And so to remove yourself from the world, the monasticism was the best idea they could come up with. And particularly the ones that were even self-flagellating, things like that. Those were all attempts to remove human nature from the worship of God. So when I hear worldly, I think human nature. We're at war with ourselves.
Yeah. They found out rather quickly living in these monasteries, and the deeper you dig into the world of the monasteries and what happened, you find that they were just as jealous of each other as people in the world were jealous of each other. And they had just as many controversies as people in the world had controversies. And they were just sometimes as divided in the monasteries as the people in the world were. So yes, you can build a wall, you can go move out to the middle of the desert and build a wall and say, we're out of the world. But the problem is, just like Brad said, human nature follows you. And that's kind of my next point, is that wherever people go, Satan is not going to be very far behind. And if you're attempting to make the church be what you feel like the church ought to be, Satan's going to be there going, really? Well, how about this? Well, how about this? Well, why don't we do this? And so you're going to laugh at this. Well, maybe you won't. I am deeply sympathetic to these monastics. I really am. Because they saw what was happening to the church. And they said, we need to fix this. Now, was their solution right? No. Was it healthy? Not 100%. But I really am sympathetic to the ability for these men and women to say, I am going to go against this stream that is carrying the church further and further and further away from Christ. And I'm going to build a bulwark so that we can stop this. The courage that they had, the effort that they put into it, I'm not excusing all the mistakes. I'm not excusing all the errors that they made. But I really am sympathetic and appreciative of their ability to say, kind of paraphrasing Martin Luther here I stand, I can do no other. All right? I meant to do this earlier in the lesson, and we are going to come back to this a number of times throughout the rest of our study here. The Roman Catholic Church, I learned this 10, 15, that would be 50, yeah, somewhere around 10 years ago. The Roman Catholic Church accomplished something that I think is fascinating. And that is, you've got the vast, overwhelming, what we would consider to be the Roman Catholic Church. All right? At the center of the Roman Catholic Church is what they would consider to be the absolute core of what it means to be a Catholic, a universal Christian. Catholic simply means universal. All right? So what does it mean to be a Christian? And so they would say, obviously, you have to accept and to follow the creeds. You have to be able to confess the creed. A creed is simply a statement of what we believe. All right? They would also say, and this kind of goes back to the creeds, is that you have to accept the decisions of the councils, especially the ecumenical councils, the councils that the church, there's a little saying, and I can't remember what century, like 1100s, somewhere along in there, 1000s, 1100s, somewhere along in there. What everybody has believed, what everybody has always believed everywhere, right? That's kind of the nuts and bolts concept of the Catholic Church. Everybody, everywhere, for all time, right? So as long as you have that nugget, as long as you have that core, the Roman Catholic Church then allows and has welcomed a vast number of individual groups and subsets without real conflict. So, for instance, you have your Franciscans, you have your Dominicans, you have your Augustinians, you have your what else did I come up with? You have your monks of many different stripes. Franciscans, Dominicans, Jesuits. Yeah, we need our Jesuits up here. Society of Jesus. You have all of these different groups, which some of them have really kind of differing views of Christianity. Franciscans and Dominicans look at the church kind of two different directions. Augustinians, very different. All the different kinds and all the different houses of monastics. You've got your Benedictines, you've got your Cistercians, you've got dozens different kinds of monks. The Jesuits themselves have a very narrow view of the Roman Catholic faith, and yet they all get along. They're all Roman Catholics. And as I ponder this and I compare this to, like, for instance, the Restoration movement, we've got just as many groups, if not more, but we're at each other's throats. You use an instrument of music, you're not a Christian. You have a coffee pot in your church, you're not a Christian. You have multiple cups at your communion service. You're not a Christian. And so where the Roman Catholic Church was able to say, okay, you can kind of have all these very different views so long as we're one big family, because we all hold on to this core nugget of what it means to believe what everybody believes for all times, everywhere. They allowed the Dominicans to have their point of view, and the Franciscans to have their point of view, and the Jesuits to have their point of view. And I think, what would it have been like early on in the Restoration movement if we had a voice to stand up and say, we can have different opinions, but we're still one church. Romans 14. We came close. We came so close. But party divisions and jealousy and that kind of stuff kind of won the day. And so we have just as many divisions. It's just that we hate each other. And that really hurts. That we said we were going to restore New Testament Christianity, and like I said, we came so close. Oh, we came so close. If we had just listened to a couple of different voices. But that didn't work. Any questions or comments or anything about monasticism? I'm not a Roman Catholic, so I cannot answer obviously all the questions, but any comments or questions? Or Brad, you had it.
I find the scenario with Jesuits to be remarkable because of not only their history period, they consider themselves to be the right arm and sword of the church. And in the West here, in Colorado, there is a very unique history of the Jesuits, and that most of the early missionaries that came in with Spanish conquistadors and everything like that were Jesuits. Moreover, there's a real connection between the Jesuits and the Penitente Brotherhood in the western part of our state. When it was clear the Jesuits were going to be ousted, forcibly by death in some cases, they established that to leave a root, a remainder of faithful that was the Penitente Brotherhood. So Jesuits have a very unique role that historically has played out in the Catholic Church.
The Penitentes are very powerful in northern New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
There's typically a kind of a pilgrimage of the Penitentes in northern New Mexico. And so it's, the Jesuits are they have a really funny history because, like you said, they kind of started out as being the right arm, the enforcers of the Roman Catholic Church. And now I could be wrong, and if I am, I beg everybody's indulgence, but they are almost kind of one of the more liberal wings of the Roman Catholic Church. I wish I understood more. But any other thoughts or questions, comments? This is a very, very fascinating development within the church. Next week, what we're going to do is the other huge political/religious development that took place between the 600s and 1100s is the rise of Islam. So I'm going to go from something I know nothing about to something I know even less about nothing about. But that's where we're going to be looking at next week is the rise of Islam and Mohammedanism.